Back then it was fondling, touching, making me touch my mother. When perhaps she thought she could take it further, she did. And she would make me have sex with her, moving my body against hers. And if I did not respond physically, she would beat me, choke me, hit me, throw me from the bedroom. I had to help her reach orgasm. I absolutely had to. Until that happened, I was a prisoner in her bed, and it was this awful screeching sound she would make when she finally reached orgasm, and then she would hit me and push me. I would go to bed that night. I could not get the smell of her off my hands. That was the worst smell. By the time I was 9 and 10, it just seemed, it felt consensual. I wanted to die. I wanted to be rid of this ugly feeling of being my mother's lover.
So we're talking about a 10-year-old boy, 10 years old. Greg's mother died nearly 14 years ago, but he just recently came out of the shadows to tell his story. You know, we don't hear about mother-son abuse very often. That doesn't mean that it isn't happening. And we just heard you say that by the time you were 10, that your mother's abuse was feeling consensual. And is that because it felt pleasurable to you?
It wasn't because it felt pleasurable. It never did. It was actually awful for me. The reason was because my body began to respond biologically to the stimulus.
Meaning you would get an erection?
Absolutely. Before that, it was primarily fondling because I was unable to obtain an erection or certainly maintain one. As I grew older and my body matured physically, it responded physically. And very confusing because I could not disassociate between the biological response my body was making naturally to my mind's ability to say it was consensual or not consensual.
Did you think that this was normal? Did you think it was normal?
Yes.
I thought all little boys were having sex with their mothers. And I only ask that because I think when you are being molested in this way, you don't have a language for it. See, like now as an adult, you can stand and say when she would screech and have the orgasm. But when you're a little boy, you don't know what that is.
Right. Absolutely.
Right. You don't have the language for what this is.
Later, when you're able to articulate it, it's different. But as a child, it seems that this is how a parent would react to their child. I thought all boys were having this type of relationship with their mothers.
And so how was she able to seduce you? You know, we've been talking the past week with the other molesters about the whole seduction process. Was there a seduction process for you, or was she just, you know, beating you into submission at first?
With me, it was the beating. The beatings were consistent. When the sexual abuse started, they started as any beating would start, except there was a very distinctive wording that would occur.
Like what?
My mother would say when I was to be beaten, she would use an expletive and say, "Come here." Or she would tell me to stand there while she beat me. But when the sexual abuse started, she would say, "Mother needs you." It was more manipulative, gentle, much more gentle.
And then after she had reached orgasm, she would then be angry, or what?
Well, the beatings were worse if she did not reach orgasm. So I tried very hard. I tried very hard to help her reach orgasm because the quicker she did, I was able to leave and go to my own room. The
But let me just ask you this, and listen, I know that part of the shame of molestation is that so many people who were lured, seduced, and molested in the beginning felt pleasure from that, because sexual pleasure is sexual pleasure. I always say this, imagine yourselves in your very first sexual experience and somebody is touching you sexually. If they are doing that in a loving, nurturing way, that is supposed to feel good. That is supposed to feel good. That is why everybody is doing it, because it is supposed to feel good. And if you're a child and you don't even know what that is, you know, your body's never even sensed that before. There are all of these, newly aroused feelings. I'm sure that feels good, unless somebody is trying to hurt you.
If my mother had been gentle and kind and sweet, I'm sure the experience would have been much different. Mm-hmm. But because it was associated with the brutality of the physical abuse and her anger when she could not reach orgasm and her dismissiveness, if she did and when she did reach orgasm, it was get out.
Get out.
And followed with, you did this to me. She would tell me that I seduced her. This was my doing. I initiated it. And I certainly believe that.
That has got to be hell for a little boy, 10 years old. So weren't you completely confused?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
At first I did.
Did you think that was love, is what I'm asking?
At first I did.
At first you did?
Absolutely. It was much different than the physical abuse. So at first...
Do we have a picture of Greg at 10 years old? Do we have a picture of him at 8 or 10 years old? Can we put that picture up here? And the reason why I would like to do that is because every person who has been abused in the world and holds yourself responsible, go back and look at a picture of yourself at that age and ask yourself how that child could have stopped it. You couldn't have stopped it. There's nothing you could have done. Ask yourself how, as whatever age it happened for you, how it could possibly be your fault when you look at the picture. So what do you see when you look at that picture of yourself?
I see a young boy who was given absolutely no choice but to allow this to happen. And you make a point where you said you couldn't have stopped it. I would not have stopped it. My mother was the center of my universe. I trusted her. I loved her.
As I've said before, people think molesters are monsters in the bushes. There are some hiding in the bushes. A few are hiding in the bushes. But that is not the majority of abuse that's going on in our country. The abuser here was Greg's mother. In many cases, it's someone's father, uncle, cousin. It's babysitters, men and women. And that's what you need to know. We'll be right back.
Christy Sanchez Trujillo. She is a social studies teacher at Jimmy Carter Middle School in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Look at Albuquerque naming a middle school after Jimmy Carter. Okay, God bless. Go forward.
She actually confided in one of her teacher friends and told her, yeah, I'm having sex with my 13-year-old student.
I want to run the video because I'm interested in getting a look at her, because this is going to be entirely relevant to the story, because I'm a bad man. All right, Jesus, go.
Good evening. APS fired that teacher after police say she confessed to having sex with one of her 13-year-old students.
And tonight, police hit the 33-year-old student, a teacher that is, with rape charges. Let's get right to Jessica Garate.
Well, less than 2 hours ago, Albuquerque police gave us details that ordinarily wouldn't be available until the criminal complaint is released tomorrow. Christy Sanchez Trujillo taught social studies at Jimmy Carter Middle School for the past 2 years until she was fired today. Police say the 13-year-old victim was one of her students and that the two had developed a relationship that became sexual over the past week. We asked police if the sex had taken place at school. They said it happened off campus. They also told us how they found out about it.
Miss Sanchez Trujillo confided in another teacher that she was having an inappropriate relationship with the student. That teacher thankfully came forward immediately, told police, and APS police contacted Albuquerque police.
You're the worst.
I need to be
Sanchez Trujillo's father, Chris Sanchez, is in the running to be the next Bernalillo County Sheriff.
Oops.
We spoke to him tonight, and he said he had no comment and then quickly hung up the phone.
You don't say.
Before teaching at Jimmy Carter, Sanchez Trujillo taught at Atrisco Elementary. She also recently taught an after-school hip-hop class.
Yep.
On her Facebook page, Sanchez Trujillo says she's single with 3 kids. Tonight, she's behind bars. Diane?
APS has notified staff at Jimmy Carter Middle School
All right,
about what has happened.
Okay. Always with the concern, with the anchors. There's been rape charges. Okay. Now, look, the thing is, this is obviously a topic we need to discuss a little further, right? So, first of all, let's all get on the record that Christy Sanchez Trujillo, is totally hot. Okay, do you agree to that?
She's an attractive woman. I do agree to that.
Okay, so we have agreement on that note.
Based on that blurry picture, we don't know what she really looks like. But anyway, go ahead.
Now, number 2, I am going to submit to the court that that is relevant. Okay, now, that's outrageous, outrageous. First of all, the problem here is the kid's 13. That's way, 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 way too young, right? If the kid was 17, I'm screaming at the top of my lungs, let her go, let her go. Fire her. As always, I'm always on the record on that. You can't be having sex with your students. Obviously, you get fired over that, right? But prison, rape, okay. Now, but it's so young, but she's so hot. You see my point?
No.
Now, look. I have no real point. I have no legal point. I concede that, Justice Kasparian, right? But nonetheless, I would like to beseech the jury on something. Beseech the jury. All right. For 99% of human history, if a woman of that attractiveness came to a 13-year-old boy who had gone past puberty, okay, and offered sexual relations to him, that would have been considered what they called back in the day FTW, for the win. Okay. Now, but now in this 1% of history, we view that as horrific, right? So, and I get why, and I get that it's illegal, and I get that 13 is way too young in the context of our times, and why that makes sense. But do you see how I'm torn a little bit on that?
You're under the assumption that this 13-year-old boy has gone through adolescence.
I mean, they culminated, I guess. I mean, I'm saying the act. I'm not saying what happened in the act. I have no idea. But they apparently had some relations, is what I'm saying. So you would think. But maybe not. Maybe you're right. I don't know. And then it's tough to say, okay, the cutoff is puberty or not. Look, since he's 13, she's got to go to jail. I get that. I'm not making that argument. It's just, I guess, the idea that she raped him, again, is something. And then, so what? She goes away for 20 years, 25 years? We're really going to put her in jail for 25 years?
Look, this is the way I measure it. And it's really difficult for society to do it because they are a lot more lenient on women when it comes to this issue. I think about what the consequences would be if the tables were turned. If it was a male teacher, regardless of how attractive he is, he would be charged with rape.
Yeah, we wouldn't even be having a conversation about whether the guy's attractive or not.
We would have no conversation about it. His attractiveness would be irrelevant. And
by the way, don't get me wrong. I know I'm crazy, but I'm not stupid. I get that her attractiveness obviously should not be relevant, okay? In a court of law, you don't go, but, Your Honor, my client is hot, okay? And so the student must have, been into it a little bit at least. You see what I'm saying, Your Honor? You see what I'm saying? No, you don't get to make a case like that. But we're having a conversation here. We're talking. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and if the tables were turned, you could make the case that a young 13-year-old girl wanted to have sex with a 30-year-old man. Right, or a 30-year-old teacher.
Yeah,
who's
I feel uncomfortable making that case.
Yeah, of course. We feel uncomfortable because for some reason we're okay with sheltering the hell out of young women or young girls. But when it comes to boys, it's like, well, good job. He wanted it. He wanted that teacher.
You're right. The double standard.
So a 13-year-old boy, hold on, let me just say. So a 13-year-old boy is able to choose whether or not he could have sex with an attractive person, but a 13-year-old girl can't. Right? You can't make those comparisons. So
look, I don't know about her. I know that I am guilty as charged. Okay, I have a double standard. We've talked about it a lot, and it's unacceptable, but nonetheless it exists. And that's what spurs this conversation. I think that on a basis of law, logic, you're going to win most of the time on this conversation. But I'm telling you what a lot of guys think, because I was a 13-year-old boy, and if Kristen Sanchez Trujillo,
You're the worst.
came to me and said, hey, how you doing? I'd have definitely said back, how you doing? Okay? And then that would not, in my mind at that time, would not have been rape. Okay? Now, I might have been wrong, but that's not how I would have saw it. J.R. Jackson / Lenny Kravitz.
So which one is more important to change? The skewed idea of society or the law?
Skewed idea of society. I think. You can't have 33-year-old teachers having sex with 13-year-old students. I don't care. I don't care if it's a female. I don't care if it's a male. I don't care.
I agree with you.
I don't care if the student...
I agree with you. But
right.
Look, that's clear. 13 is way too young, so we're not having that conversation. Do you think she goes away for rape for 20, 25 years?
No, that's ridiculous. 20, 25 years is
But
ridiculous.
if it's a guy, we wouldn't think that's ridiculous at all.
Well, even for a guy, if it was consensual between the 13-year-old girl and the 30-year-old teacher, all right, he shouldn't be put away for 25 years. Neither should the teacher if she's a female, okay? It's just not right. As long as there's solid proof and evidence that it was, in fact, consensual.
So you're considering statutory rape to be different than, non-consenting rape?
Yes.
Okay. And you think that they should have different...
Yes,
that they should both be punished, but be punished
differently.
For different...
Yes, because...
That's a fair argument.
Because raping someone or having sex with someone against their will is completely different from having sex with someone who is consenting to it. I know that society thinks 13-year-olds aren't old enough to make that decision, and you know what? That's a very, very good argument, but it's still very different. There's violent rape, there's consensual rape, consensual, sex.
Sex, right. Okay, so, TYT poll on this, because I'm really curious as to what you guys think on this. I really am. So I wonder, what do most people think? Should she get as much time as a guy who did the same thing? So if it was a 33-year-old guy with a 13-year-old girl, people are going to want to throw the book at him, right? I don't know how long you want him to get, but should she get the same amount of time as him? Now, you got to almost answer yes to that, but somehow I can't answer yes to that. So I'm curious as to what people think out there.
Okay.
So let's ask them. That's our TYT poll today. And looking forward to your answer.
This was my childhood home. This is where it all started.
Greg says as a child he was physically tortured and violently raped by his mother. It's been 35 years since he escaped, but Greg's abusive past continues to torment him.
I'm working on it. I'm really working on it. But right now, at 46, I'm still inside this house.
Why do you feel stuck inside that house?
What was taken from me and any child that was abused will always be gone forever.
It's what our sex offender last week, David, said about one of his family members. I killed who she could have been. Yeah. So part of you died in there.
Absolutely. Part of me was taken. The innocence that every child deserves a chance to be innocent, to grow up innocent, that's taken.
Did you ever tell anyone outside your family? Because I keep saying to kids, tell, 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 tell. Was there anybody you could have told?
Before the age of 11, absolutely not. There were certainly teachers that I could have gone to and told, but I was deathly afraid of my mother. This was my world, my universe. Even though the house was roach-laden and that the clothes were rags and there was barely enough food, it was still shelter to me. And this was still the only parent I had. And my mother was to be feared. She was feared in the neighborhood. I was certainly afraid of her. And I was afraid if anyone found out. It wasn't just that I would be taken away from my mother. It was the absolute shame of admitting that the sexual abuse was taking place.
Many people have been shocked at the fact that two women were at the centre of this horrific case of abuse. Our home editor, Mark Easton, explains the scale of sexual abuse of children by women. Good evening. A woman who was trusted to look after babies and toddlers at a nursery in Plymouth has admitted sexually abusing children in her care, taking images of her victims and sharing the pictures with two accomplices she met on the internet. Vanessa George, who worked at Little Ted's nursery in the city, appeared in court today where she pleaded guilty to a string of offences.
Yes, and standing on either side of her were Angela Allen and Colin Blanchard. They too admitted offences of assault and making and distributing indecent images. The three, who lived hundreds of miles apart in Plymouth, Nottingham and Rochdale, texted thousands of obscene messages and sent more than 100 pictures to each other over many months. But they hadn't met until today, when they stood side by side in the dock. John Kay was in court and sent this report.
The smiling face of Vanessa George. This is how she was known to her family and to the families at the nursery where she worked. But behind their backs, she was sexually abusing young children and taking photos of that abuse. Today, she was the one being photographed, but unlike her victims, she could turn away.
If you could think of your average big bubbly woman, that was what she was like. Friendly, funny, lovely.
This mother had no idea. She trusted Vanessa George to look after her children. We have disguised her identity. There's no evidence her youngsters were among those abused by George here at the Little Ted's nursery in Plymouth, but she says the whole community has been left shattered.
The worst feeling you could ever imagine. Feeling sick 24 hours a day, not being able to sleep, drinking during the day, and just going to pick children up at the school and having mums and dads in tears and all having to hug each other.
Vanessa George had been working with children for a decade. She had passed all the required checks. She was married with 2 teenage daughters. But secretly, she was a paedophile, sexually abusing babies and toddlers, taking photographs of that abuse on her mobile phone and sending the images to others. Some of the pictures categorised by police as being the worst level of child pornography. Today, with her hair back to its natural blonde, George stared at the floor as the court heard that none of the children in her images can be identified. So for parents, some of whom were sobbing in the public gallery, the agony goes on.
Every time I look at the kids, I just wonder, did she abuse them? My husband won't talk about it. But sometimes I see him sitting there crying. I know what he's thinking. It's horrendous.
Vanessa George was urged by the judge to end the parents' uncertainty and identify her victims.
Her motivation for not telling us at this time, we don't know. Obviously, the judge was quite clear that, in his opinion, the families will want to know. And it is one of our priorities to continue, even beyond this conviction today, to try and identify those children.
For Vanessa George's estranged father, it is still too much to take in.
Every so often I think, why did she turn this way? What motivated her? It's just like as if Vanessa's lost her way. She's doing this obviously because for money. There's no other reason why she should behave like she has done.
But the police don't think it was about money. They believe Vanessa George was motivated purely by sexual gratification. She'd met 2 other people on the internet, and today they met face to face for the very first time in the dock at Bristol Crown Court. The first was this man, Colin Blanchard, a businessman from Rochdale. He was arrested after a colleague found extreme images on his computer. He'd been on the sex offenders register before. After examining his emails, the police were led to Vanessa George in Plymouth and then to another woman, Angela Allen in Nottingham. She was also 39, single, unemployed, and described by one detective as pure evil.
Single mother Angela Allen contributed a series of explicit pictures showing her abusing a 3-year-old girl.
I just feel disgusted. I just can't believe that somebody has been on the doorstep, especially a woman, and it doesn't make any difference whether it's a man or a woman, but I think the general reaction, the fact that it's a woman, has made it worse.
I don't even think it was a gender issue. I think everybody felt helpless. Everybody.
The police believe they were equal parties. all abusing children and sending thousands of obscene messages to one another and to nobody else.
The scale of their deceit, the way that they've manipulated relationships, and the cunning that they've all used for their own ends is really, really shocking. Child abuse in its most horrific and devilish form.
Exactly how their relationship began still baffles the police. But one detective said it was as if they were involved in some kind of contest, competing to produce increasingly extreme images. So after meeting here in the dock for the very first time, the 3 defendants are now being taken away to separate prisons. They'll be back here for sentencing again next month. The judge told them all they face significant times in jail. John Kay, BBC News, at Bristol Crown Court.
Many people have been shocked at the fact that 2 women were at the centre of this horrific case of abuse. Our home editor Mark Easton explains the scale of sexual abuse of children by women.
The facts of this case challenge our understanding of human nature, not just the idea that people could find pleasure in the sexual abuse of very young children, but the revelation that women were involved. However, experts claim this kind of behaviour is not as uncommon as many suppose. 1/4 of sexually abused children were the victim of a female, according to separate American and British studies. Although estimates vary, that would suggest 250,000 people in Britain today suffered sex abuse perpetrated by a woman. And yet such allegations are often disbelieved, and there are few prosecutions. In 2007, only 6 women in England and Wales were convicted of sex abuse crimes against children.
Women abuse children for the same reasons that men abuse children, for sexual gratification, for power. Quite frankly, it's something that they enjoy doing. I know that's hard for the rest of us to comprehend, but women are no different than men in that case.
A few weeks ago in Australia, a new TV campaign was launched warning of the risks of sex abuse from those entrusted with the care of children.
Then they went to the school we thought was a safe place, where a trusted person sexually assaulted Emma and Katie, silenced them with threats and changed their lives forever.
The charity involved has calculated that almost 1/3 of sex abuse by women takes place in an organisational setting, notably kindergartens and babysitting. The majority of such abusers are not coerced by a man, but initiate the abuse themselves. The damage can last a lifetime. The fear of police in Britain is that new technology has made all forms of child abuse easier and more commonplace. As in today's case, the internet allows paedophiles to communicate and share child pornography. Mobile phone cameras mean images can be shot and disseminated around the world within seconds. A kindergarten close to the Plymouth nursery involved in today's case is banning mobiles with cameras on its premises, but risk can never be eliminated.
Background checks on staff won't spot men or women who've never abused before. But there is another danger too, that we allow fears about paedophilia to damage the relationship between all adults and children, and to undermine the trust that makes communities function.
Kelsey Peterson cried and admitted what she did was wrong. The former Lexington teacher learned today she'll spend the next 5 years behind bars. The sentence handed down in U.S. District Court. Peterson received a 6-year sentence but is given credit for 1 year already served. She will not be eligible for parole but could get out after 4 years for good behavior. Peterson pled guilty in July to a federal charge of traveling with intent to have illicit sexual conduct. The former teacher left Nebraska and fled to Mexico last October with a 13-year-old boy. The two had been having a sexual relationship since he was 12.
We now have a GMA exclusive with the Nebraska teacher caught in a sex scandal with her 13-year-old student. She fled the country with him last year and was just sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. This morning, that teacher, Kelsey Peterson, is speaking out, talking about why to ABC's Jan Crawford-Greenberg, who's with us here. It's good to have you up here, Jan.
Thanks, Diane. We spent about 2.5 hours with Kelsey Peterson in a small interview room in the county jail near Omaha, Nebraska. It was the first time that she's talked publicly about this, and she had a lot to say, beginning with her regrets.
If I could go back and be that person that I was supposed to be, I would do it in a second.
And what person were you supposed to be?
Oh, that teacher that got married and had a family and, you know, the little middle-class, normal, white picket, everyday, small-town American girl. I grew up in this really Christian, we don't do things wrong kind of family. And that's all I wanted. And yet I made choice after choice after choice that didn't allow that.
Those choices began when 25-year-old Kelsey Peterson started a sexual relationship with Fernando Rodriguez, a 12-year-old student with a crush.
I remember him specifically asking me one day in the middle of class if I'd marry him.
A single mom, Kelsey and her little girl were living with her parents. Kelsey was teaching middle school math in the small town of Lexington, Nebraska. Only 10 years before, she was a student there herself. She quickly became a popular teacher.
I had a lot of kids that knew they could trust me and held a lot of confidence in me.
In Fernando, Kelsey saw a sixth grader with promise, but troubling signs he was running with a gang.
Something drew me to him, and I think more than anything, I think it was, I can change this guy.
Kelsey's lawyer says Fernando wanted more.
He tried to kiss her, he would grab her, he would do these things. She didn't initiate this relationship. That young man did.
Fernando began calling Kelsey on her cell phone. After she moved to Lexington, he started showing up at her house.
I remember the first day he kissed me. I was shocked. I can remember thinking, whoa, this isn't, no.
How old did you think he was?
It would have been 13. That's just it. It got to the point in my life where, or in our relationship, we didn't see age anymore.
But, he was still, at least in the eyes of the law, a boy.
Mm-hmm. He wasn't, in my mind, he quit being a teenage boy. He was 5'8", 170 pounds, and he had my name tattooed across his chest, and to me, he was a man.
But he was in 7th grade. Kelsey's 5-year-old daughter stayed at her parents during the week, and Fernando began sleeping at her house.
It's not like I chased little boys or like younger men or anything like that. It had nothing to do with that. It was him in general. I loved him, or I thought I loved him, and I thought I needed him, and he was that drug to me. And it spiraled my life so far out of control, I couldn't find a way out anymore.
They took chances going out in public, and people started to talk.
My principal came in and asked for my laptop computer.
Court records show that on that laptop were love letters between Kelsey and Fernando. School officials banned her from the classroom.
What were you thinking then?
How am I going to get out of this? What am I going to do?
Kelsey and Fernando decided to run.
And then he says to me, we'll be back by Christmas. We'll leave and it'll just all go away. And we're leaving and I am just bawling. I'm driving down the interstate and I'm crying the whole way. And I can remember him looking at me one time and he said, are you going to cry the whole effing way? And I remember looking at him and saying, well, I might. Do you realize what I've just left?
Fernando, who was an illegal immigrant, had family in Mexico. That's where they headed, but the FBI was on their trail.
The run from the law for math teacher Kelsey Peterson and her 13-year-old student ended here in Mexicali, Mexico on Friday night.
It was the last time Kelsey saw Fernando. She's been in jail in the U.S. ever since. When she gets out of prison, Fernando will be an adult.
If he tries to reach you, are you going to see him?
I think that's probably my biggest fear right now. I pray that doesn't happen. Because, granted, there's no closure here.
One door that has closed, sharing her daughter's childhood.
My little girl said, I haven't touched my mom for almost a year. And when you think about that, she was my life.
When Kelsey is released from prison, her daughter will be a teenager.
That little girl, I owe her more apology than I can ever give. I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry. I'm sorry to so many people. I hurt people, and the ripple effect is huge. And I am so sorry for that. And there's so many sorries I won't even be able to tell them all.
Now, Kelsey will never teach again. She'll be a registered sex offender, but she has some advice for other young women teachers. Don't try to be friends with your students. The boys, she says, will confuse your interest, your concern for sexual interest.